Well, good morning and thank you, Chris. I'll move straight over to weather, and you've already brought up a couple key topics here, so I appreciate that. Thanks for heat, and unfortunately dryness are probably one of the take homes here today. Unfortunately, the big news here over the last week for many parts, unfortunately not everyone, but many people in the state here, was the rainfall event over the weekend, late Saturday and Sunday. And we had on the left-hand side here, these are weekly totals, sorry, through yesterday morning. But the key thing is that the vast majority of this precipitation occurred in a 24-hour period. Again, most of it late Saturday night through Sunday. And you can see here, especially for west central lower Michigan, that was sort of the bullseye. Many areas got between 2 and 4 inches of rain, and that was well, it was desperately needed or sorely needed. But as is true with many things, it depended on where you were, and as you moved north from there and east from there, the totals dropped off. But it was the most widespread significant rainfall we'd had in Michigan in some time, several weeks, to say the least. On the right-hand side here, I also added a 60-day precip departure from normal after this rainfall. Where does that leave us? Well, for some areas, and you can see some greens down here indicating surpluses for south central and portions of west central now, with actually a little bit of a surplus. That's this time of the year something we don't always see, but it's a great thing. However, there are areas, especially portions of central and east central lower, then northward into northern lower Michigan, and more with time across the lake into portions of upper Michigan, and you can see here northern Wisconsin into Minnesota. That's another area that has become really unusually or abnormally dry over the last couple of weeks. Departures from normal here, these are actually expressed in inches, and what we had with our recent dryness in many spots, deficits somewhere on the order of 2 to maybe 4, some cases 5 inches here over the last couple of months. That's a lot of water. Most months here in the summer on normal, we get between 3 and 3.5 inches per month. That's the normal precipitation. Again, to give you an idea. So these deficits were fairly large. And again, of special note here, note in the thumb, portions of the Saginaw Valley, and then across up into southern lower Michigan, or southern upper Michigan, sorry, we still have some fairly significant deficits there. And given the forecast, that is going to become, again, continue to be an issue. I'll talk more about that in a moment. This is also something we don't see too often. This is the quick drought response index, which is a combination of both satellite data and then surface data, looking at major changes in water status in the basically of the vegetation, whatever happens to be there, the canopy and access to water. And the color scheme here, you probably could see right away, is the yellows and browns are all deficits and below normal type situations, droughty type conditions, whereas the blues are the opposite, where we've got a bit of a surplus. And something, again, this thing is, particular index is used because it is designed to detect rapid changes from either wet to dry or vice versa. And this is certainly one of those examples here. On the left-hand side is the image from the week of the 17th. And then the image on the right is the current one from the 24th, which does take into account the rain that fell over the weekend. And again, especially here in west central lower, we went from fairly significant drought and dryness with major lack of water to surplus, and that's just something we don't see very often. But that's what 3 inches of rain will do for you. Note also, maybe more important, just as importantly, portions of central and east central lower Michigan, and then up into the central and western UP, still remain drier than they typically are this time of the year, with it's certainly issues of lack of available water. And that is, again, with our forecast, unfortunately, that's going to continue to be a theme. Temperature wise, it was a very warm week last week. On the left hand side here, this is a different format today, a different source, but the same product. But you can see Mean temperatures for the week, 3 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. It was relative to normal, it was one of the warmest weeks of the growing season thus far. Not surprisingly, on the right-hand side here are seasonal base 50-degree days. The same pattern across the state with some minor deficits way up in the north, but surpluses in the south. Well, those surpluses have grown because of the warm temperatures, but you can see we have maybe somewhere between 20, 30 or so units deficit in portions of the UP to more than 100 units surplus. And so that translates again to several days, maybe pushing a calendar week ahead of normal now in some locations right along the Indiana and Ohio state lines. And again, that's a pattern we've seen all growing season. Well, where are we headed? We've talked about it. Chris talked about this. We've actually got two. Right now, we're in a pattern with northwesterly flow aloft. There's a troughing feature there. And when that happens, it's unusual to see a troughing feature this strong at this time of the year in the sort of in the mid, almost getting to the late summer. But we have one, and we have, as a result of that, we've got Canadian air moving over the Great Lakes. And we had one frontal system go through yesterday. You can see that on the map here, now out moving towards the mid-Atlantic. We have a second one, and it's being driven by a weak disturbance aloft in the jet stream. And the issue is here that if you look to our south, and if you've watched the news, you saw some of the incredible rainfall totals down in the St. Louis area, portions of Missouri and Illinois. That's basically a stationary frontal boundary down here. And so all of the moisture coming up, it's trying to come up from the Gulf of Mexico up into the Midwest. That's where it's basically being rained out or remaining. And there's very little that can get farther north of that. So even though we've got a frontal boundary and an upper air disturbance and some vertical lift here, there's just very, very little moisture for this system to work with. But sometimes happens, and you can see the radar pic. We do, or time lapse here for the last hour, we do have an area of showers. And there might be an embedded rumble of thunder here, but mostly just some light rain. With a couple of embedded higher spots moving from west to east across the state. And if you do see precipitation, because some areas will remain dry, this is not a big rainfall producer, generally going to see 1/10 of an inch or less. Some places might do a little bit better than that, but all of that system will be out by this afternoon as that frontal boundary again continues to move eastward and high pressure moves in behind it. It will be, depending on location, variably cloudy. It will be cooler than normal. We're only looking for high temperatures once again today in the 70s, so a few degrees below where we typically are. It will also be breezy, especially this afternoon with some of the higher winds aloft mixing down to the surface. So again, the chance for showers here over the next few hours or several hours, and then that'll clear the state, and then clearing, breezy, and drier. And by the time we move into tomorrow, you can see very, very clearly here. Here's that center of the next Canadian air mass over the Dakotas. That's going to be with us here for the next several days and lead to a fair, dry, and cooler than normal pattern here for the next few days. The weather tomorrow and Saturday are beautiful conditions. Certainly great to be outside. But by the time we get to late in the weekend, here's Saturday morning, you can see the high centered over northern Indiana. Again, just gorgeous conditions, fair and dry and cool. By Sunday, we should see a noticeable warm up as the high goes to our east. We start to get some return flow. And after today, the next chance for any precipitation, you can start to see a little bit of a system out here to our west. It will be probably Monday, maybe later in the day, and then overnight Monday into Tuesday. That's the next chance for anything significant. It's still up in the air a little bit. Initially, we look at the guidance. It didn't look like a huge system with a lot of rainfall, but it still could. It's still several days out, but that really is the next chance for anything meaningful in terms of precipitation early next week, Monday, Tuesday timeframe. The really big issue, I think, is that in the upper air, we're going to see the trough that's currently over the Great Lakes. And I'll get to this in just a moment, but that moves out and sets a stage for a significant warm up for early August. Now, in terms of precip totals for the upcoming week, very, very high likelihood it's going to be drier than normal. There's almost no way around that. These are the totals through next Thursday morning. And for most of the state, you can see less than 1/4 of an inch. I think that's and that includes what might fall today and plus on Monday. So again, you can see there's not a whole lot in terms of water expected here in the outlook for the next week. A little bit more as you go towards the northern part of the state, into northern lower and into the upper peninsula, and then right along the border. But for most of the state, this is going to be a mostly dry week. In terms of our reference potential evapotranspiration rates, that's again the standard reference. With a grass crop, your crop might be a little bit different than that based on where it is and what stage. You can see most of the values here between 1.2 and 1.3 to 1.4 inches for the week. So at or a little bit below normal for this time of the year. We are climatologically now, we are at the time of the year where these rates would typically be peak, the reference value for the entire year. These are typically when we see the highest ones. That goes into the first couple of weeks of August as well. But so these are at or just a little bit below where the climatology says, and some of that is because of the cooler temperatures over the next couple days. Now, I mentioned where next. Well, if on the left-hand side here, we have conditions forecast for tomorrow morning, including both the upper air on the top, and then these are temperature anomalies at the surface on the bottom. And then on the right-hand side, we have a forecast for next Thursday, so next week. And if you look at the upper air, you can see a huge change. Here's that big troughing feature I talked about, and it's a no-brainer when we see that. And we typically, again, don't see a trough that strong at this time of the year, but it's there. And with it, northwesterly flow and air out of the higher latitudes, which is why we have these cool temperatures. But look what happens next week. Ridge comes back, and of course that ridge has been an issue across the United States, the continental U.S. here for much of the last couple of months, bringing intense heat, and we've been luckily to the north of that much of the time. But next week, it does look like the ridge is going to get closer to the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes, and that's going to make a big difference for us. We likely will be looking at certainly at high temperatures well into the mid and upper 80s by early next week. And then I think we'll probably be back in the 90s by later in the week, and probably for some time. You can see that depicted here pretty well with those temperature anomalies. Strong likelihood of this. Most of the forecast guidance is all pointing in the same direction and at a similar solution. And that's exactly what you see here. And that ridge comes back, develops over the area, and brings heat. That's the theme in the medium-term forecast. Both the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day outlooks very, very similar here in calling for that ridging over central and eastern portions of North America, including the Great Lakes. And that leads, but more than anything, very, very high likelihood of warmer than normal temperatures. Also, and again, unfortunately for those areas that did not get as much rain over the last couple weeks here, normal to below normal precipitation totals. Both 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks are calling for this. And as we move ahead, I hate to beat a horse here over and over again, but the same theme is showing up in our new long lead guidance. And on this graphic on the top, we have our new August outlook, mean temperatures on the left, precipitation totals on the right. And while the outlooks, and on the bottom here, these are the 3-month values, the 3-month forecast for August through October. So the end of the late summer and into the early fall. Both of those earlier versions had been also calling for warmer than normal. It's actually warmer than normal again in the new outlook, but at even higher probabilities. The change, and I think this is the one that's a little concerning here for below normal precipitation. That is new. That was not in the old outlooks, but it's there now. And a lot of this has to do with the pattern that we just saw in the medium range. So again, the first half of August in particular is one of the reasons why we see this outlook from the guide, from the forecast numerical guidance. Warmer and drier than normal is the direction, and it even continues into the seasonal outlook, as you can see. So I'll wrap up there. And by saying again, a few showers here today, but we're looking at a few very, very nice days here beyond that for tomorrow, Saturday, and then into Sunday, and then next chance for rain early next week. But the bigger news is that that pattern change in the upper air and moving towards maybe a hot and dry extended period here for the first part of August. And I'll stop there and move into introduce our topic theme here for shifting gear to alfalfa, although Chris talked about that a little bit here today too, but we'll have Dr. Kim Cassida with us to talk about alfalfa planting recommendations, and that's 1 week from today, our first virtual breakfast for August. And with that, I will turn it back over here to Jenna and or Phil. Thanks.